Mapay nga adlaw ha iyong tanan. In this interview, I will engage with the life and works of Merlie M. Alunan. Merlie M. Alunan has published 6 poetry collections to date. She has also anthologies, edited anthologies to her name, which won her honors, uh, such as the National Book Award for translation and the anthology. She is also currently Professor Emeritus of the University of the Philippines System.
I was a teacher before I was a writer. I finished my MA in, well, not exactly finished, but anyway, I finished my academics in 1975 or thereabouts. And then I got married. We transferred to Bohol. Then I had these girls, I had Marge Vasco in my class. Yeah. So, in Bohol, in the Divine Word College. Yeah. And a lot of other very bright kids. But a lot of other kids also were dropping off from my class. You know, they enroll in your class after 2 or 3 weeks. They find out that you're a terror, sort of, and so they drop out. But Marge Vasco and a few other kids would follow me from one class to another, even if they didn't need the units. Uh, so I was more of a teacher than a student. After I finished my MA in, or did my academics for the MA in creative writing, I didn't really know if I can write, truly if I can write. I got engrossed with motherhood. And really, at that stage in my life, I said, being a mother is enough. Being a wife is enough. And raising a good family is enough. And so I set my eyes on that. And then, so I help people become poets and writers before I helped myself become one. And I really thought I would not write. I really thought I would just teach. I wasn't even sure I wanted to teach as a career. I thought I was just going to teach on the sides, but my main line would really be raising a family. Oo. And then, what happened? Matagal, a long process. My family broke apart. We went through very difficult times, and the job that I thought I was just going to do for pleasure and for keeping my brain awake turned out to be really a necessity for the family. So uh, I also began to think seriously about teaching. You know? Nang hawa mis Bohol, balhin mis Cebu. Unya, sa Cebu, nag-teach ko og 3 ka tuig sa UP. Unya, pagkahuman adto, gibalhin mi diri na sa Tacloban. Uh, these were moves that were meant to keep the family under shelter and food, bring food and shelter. I went home to my family where I was sure the children would be safe, and then I changed my campus from UP Cebu to UP Tacloban. Still not writing. And then 2 years of teaching in UP, they were kind enough to grant me a fellowship to go to Siliman to take up my PhD.
This was
1985. 1985, yeah. Still not writing. I finished somewhere along 1979. I finished my academics along 1979. So when UP granted me that fellowship to take up my PhD, I said I will go to Siliman. I will bring all the children with me. So we went to Siliman. That's how our paths converged. About 2 or 3 years into that, and I took up my PhD. And then there was one particular summer workshop which I attended. I think this was in the summer of 1985. And it was in that workshop where I realized that I have really been escaping all these many years from what I should be doing, escaping from writing. And I decided to I will write. Yes. It's like, what I noticed, what I realized after all those years was that I really never stopped writing in my head. I had that words were always kind of haunting me. Words would not stop marching or making a procession in your mind, whether you are asleep or you are awake. The words are always there. And so I said, I should maybe really write. And so 1985, I decided that I will accept. I did not yet call myself a writer yet, not at that stage. But shortly after that, I won the Palanca. And just as soon as I said I will, I started getting my works together. And one summer, Krip Yuson said, "Why don't you send your works? Why don't you join the Palanca?" So I did, and surprised myself by by winning. I had a collection of works already that I could, put together. The Palanca requires something like 10 or
10 to 15.
15 pieces. Yes,
The poems from Green Valley was part of that
comes from that collection.
collection.
Yes.
And it became Hearthstone and Sacred Tree
Yeah,
later.
it became Hearthstone Sacred
And you
Tree.
were around 19, you were around 40 years old when you began writing?
I was 40 years
You were
old.
40 years old.
40 years old with 5 children, and God rest his soul, an erring husband, and no money, absolutely no money, because there was no. How much does a teacher receive? In fact, when I was in Siliman, uh, I was also teaching in the English department, which was not supposed to be, done. If you are teaching in UP and you are granted a UP scholarship. But I told my dean here, I said, I'm going to accept a job in Siliman because I can't feed my children otherwise. So, but don't worry, I will work on my work. I will work on my studies as assiduously as I can. So for 4 years, that's what I did. I moonlighted at many other jobs so that I can keep my family together. Yeah, that was it. That was how it went. Still, I was diffident about calling myself a writer. There was a workshop in which I submitted a piece of work. I think the poem "Old Man Lisage," which is in Hearthstone. Yes, in that it received a very nice reading from Edith, not very lukewarm reading from Cirillo. But anyway, the reading from Edith gave me some hope, no, a large dose of um, affirmation. And then I had a dream. The poem was taken up in the morning, and then we had a brief time. I I went home, we took a siesta, and had a very vivid dream, which went this way. I was walking with my husband on the beach. It was afternoon. I can remember the colors of the sunset, very beautiful. And then suddenly there was an earthquake. The mountains crumbled. And in that dream, my teeth fell out. All of my teeth fell out. And I was picking them up from the sand. But there was no fear. There was no fear, no pain, no anguish. I was just picking up my teeth on the sand. And then when I stood up, I saw a pool of water, and in that pool of water, there was a child floating face down. We picked up the child, and it turned out to be Anjanette, who was said in those days as my most my prettiest daughter. So we picked her up. She was fine, so we walked with her between us. And then another child came in. I mean, came into my consciousness. This child was had a face of a monkey. I mean, small, stunted, monkey-like appearance, and he was wearing a blue pair of shorts and a yellow shirt. And so I said, it's okay if I lost everything else, even my teeth, it's okay. At least I have my most beautiful child and my brightest child. Because that monkey child was supposed to be the brightest of my children. And so we walked home, or we walked away from that beach with the two children between us. And that was the dream. And so I told Edith about it. And this is how she explained it. She said, the dream of teeth falling out of your mouth signifies death. This is not death, not necessarily physical death. It could be the end of something. Something has died. A part of you, maybe a part of your life, maybe some form of whatever it is that you are going through now, that's going to end now. That has ended. That's the symbol of teeth falling out of your mouth in your dream. It's the death or the end of something. I said, your beautiful child, those are your children. He said, the monkey child is the child that you never attended to. And that's your poetry. She said, that's your poetry. And in a way, it helped me resolve certain problems, certain questions about should I or shouldn't I write. I had no business writing at the time when my family was hardly making ends meet. But I think if it were not for the writing, I wouldn't have survived those years, because the writing, finally, when I accepted it, the writing kept me sober, kept me grounded. Funny, sane, yes. Funny that something crazy like writing poetry would keep you sane, but it did keep me sane. It did keep me sane. Apart from from the fact that I can never be insane, because if I did, everyone will starve. Everyone will starve. People will go out of school, and I don't know how we would live. But that's how it was. I began my life with a short story,
And
and not with poetry, because stories are more accessible, but they're more immediate. It's what happens every day. You see it happen in people. You see it happen to yourself. So you believe that you can write the story. And besides, the readings I was doing, they were all in the line of fiction. The novels that you consumed, like there's no tomorrow. you know, Going from it's what kept, I think, the reading and the reading and later on the writing, they kept me grounded.
your thesis on
My
fiction
thesis,
was,
yeah, had a weird title.
yeah, the transform. I don't find it weird. It's really interesting. The
Mhm.
transformation of setting into character.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that?
Well, I must really give credit to Edith, because she allowed titles like that to be explored, or themes like that to be explored. Because she really has a large mind. She really has one of the largest minds of any person I have met. Uh, Essentially, it's that in fiction, nothing is inactive. Everything moves. Everything changes other things. So in setting, uh, in fiction, setting can also be uh, a very active element. It's not a passive. It's not just a local. It's not just the background. It can actually act in its own way, and act in a way that is also, let us say, conscious, because it's the consciousness of the writer that's making all of these things dynamic. No? So that's what I saw at that time. And I remember one of the stories that impressed me most about, that became the starting point of my exploration is Eudora Welty's story. Um, I forgot the title of that story now, but it's about a woman whose life is taken up by gardening. So she gardens every afternoon. She goes out to garden, and it seems like that's all she lived for. And somewhere, because the story begins, in the present, then it takes us back to the time when she was in her garden, when she looked up uh, a tree that overhangs her gate fell at the very moment that her husband was driving in his car, and the tree crashed on the car and killed him. So what can be more active than that element of setting, the tree falling on the car? It cannot be just a passive thing. I mean, it cannot be just a place. Setting is very active. It changes our lives. It can change our lives. It can direct the way our lives would turn. In fiction, we see that particularly because setting in fiction is not just an address. It's not an address. It's part of what the author manipulates or crafts to create the reality. This reality. So that's Eudora Welty. I had in that essay. I think in that thesis I had Faulkner. Yeah. James Joyce. I had the African writer Nadine Gordimer. Yeah. The first time I read Nadine Gordimer, and I I liked her immensely. I wasn't married then when I was doing my master's, so uh, it was during or after I did my master's that I got married. So I finished my master's, finished my academics anyway. I wrote my thesis in Bohol already when we transferred. Yeah. So after doing my master's in Siliman, I got married. We moved to Bohol. I actually finished my dissertation. My finished my thesis in Bohol, and then went back to Siliman. And then I've taught in Cebu, moved to Dumaguete. I moved to Tacloban, and then from Tacloban moved back to Dumaguete to do my PhD. Yes, which UP again was very kind to grant me. But my purpose at that time was not really to do my PhD, but really to bring my family under one roof, the children under one roof, and under my eyes, under my supervision. Because when I was teaching here, the children were in Ormoc. Yeah. So we stayed on that life for a couple of years, and the children were growing up. It was very, very difficult. And finally decided this cannot go on. This children cannot grow up without my supervision. So my plan really to go to Siliman was just to provide a proper home proper setting for bringing up a family. Luckily, the tiempos were there and the PhD program was still in place, so I was able to enroll. But I did take my PhD studies seriously too, though. It wasn't all fun and it was just like trying to put everything together. When I was under Edith, one of the things that she would always tell us when we are interpreting a story, a poem, is she would say, look for the story in the poem. Uh, Always look for the narrative in the poem because any poem, she says, will always have a narrative. The reader must look for it if he wants or if she wants to read the poem, properly. I agree with her pretty much because after all, what is to me, I have the simplest definition of poetry. I think of it as just basically a human utterance. It cannot come from nowhere. It comes always from a human being. And when a human being speaks, he does not speak out of nothing. He speaks out of motivation, out of situations, and he wants to convey something even to himself, not necessarily to others, but even to himself. He wants to say something, and uh, and so there is a story. There is always a story. You have to be aware that if you want to read a poem properly, you have to look for that story, look for that human story, before anything else. So that I suppose that is why I write uh, with a very strong narrative element in my poetry.
I'll quote Jaime Anlim. What Jaime Anlim
Yeah.
said about your poetry
As a
collection.
matter of fact, I was just reading the introduction I made for Jaime and Lib this morning. Yeah, for his book, the last book, Auguries.
Hours.
Yeah, Auguries.
So this is what he said
Mm.
about Running with Ghosts. That's your latest poetry collection. Death is a faithful companion in a life's journey. Death in the guise of heaving sea or sliding earth. Death in the hands of indifferent nature or death in the hands of malicious men. But the poet holds the final card against the claims of death and time and oblivion. She can tell stories. I think that sums up you and your work's relationship with narrative. How would you react to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good, very fair reading of my work. Yes, I am not very lyrical. I think
Yeah, you
not
said
very lyrical, but very grounded on the human story. Because my poems are grounded on what happens to men and women. What happens to their lives, their responses to uh, things that happen in their lives.
I think the way
What
Penny
they're
and Lim describes it is you would use in this poetry collection.
Mhm.
It's almost bare, spare. I think the word bare or spare. The language is very ordinary.
Yes,
It's
that's
almost
true.
ordinary.
I find myself writing less and less. I find myself towards this last years to be writing in using ordinary words, not striving at all for what you might call poetic, but
Lyric.
lyric. No, no, no. Mm. Looking for the poetic in situations, in human situations. Yeah.
And then there's also one thing that there's also one observation of Jaime and Lim, I think, that would connect it with what Edith Tiempo has also said about your work in your first poetry collection, Heart Snow and Sacred Tree, where she talks about one of them. She talks about uh, one of the insights that you strive towards achieving in your work, which is darkness is darkness is sight. And I think it's connected with death and the stories about loss and grief, and which are which are immensely problematized in your poetry, in your body of work, I should say.
I guess that I did not have an easy life. And I think because life hadn't been kind, and too easy for me, um, you have to look for what joy you can find, what beauty you can find, and to look for that even in the face of loss, in the face of pain. So I suppose it must be because of the way life has dealt with me. But it's okay. I'm not complaining.
Way of saying, another way of saying it would be it's your way of making sense of
Perhaps
what
it's
were
yeah,
things that you went through.
making sense and coping. I think it's a way of coping with what there are to cope with. There was quite a lot. Yeah, quite a lot to cope with. Hindi tiempo,
Of course.
the most influential of all. And because I studied under her, uh, so I cannot help but you know love the poets that she loved also, and showed you how to
Which
love
are
these poets.
who were these
Yeah,
poets?
oh, not really. They're, you might say, they're the core of contemporary poetry. People like T.S. Eliot and
Frost, I'm sure.
Robert Frost, yes, of course, and uh, A.E. Huseman, she liked very much. W.H. Auden, uh, Wallace Stevens, oh, she liked those writers, and she really punished us, because we did not know how to read. I mean, I started out not really knowing anything about literature at all, so I had to grope my way during my first year, my first semester in Silliman. I really had to struggle because I didn't know where I was coming from, where anything was coming from. Because I finished college in this little big university in Cebu, the University of the Visayas. Yeah, that's where I finished college. And it's a huge university. I mean, like, there are 660, probably they would force 60, if not 70, into a class, if possible. Yeah. You might call it a diploma mill. Anyway, that's where I finished college, and my only advantage at that time was because I really was a reader. I read, and so reading was a pleasure. It was not something I feared. So it was not very difficult for me to cope. I did catch up, no? And you had Edith and Edilberto as your teacher. So I had to work very hard to catch up. So those were the poets that she fed us with, and we cannot help but
What
felt.
about fiction? Who were your
Ah,
readings? What were your readings?
Tiempo at that time was very particular about Ernest Hemingway.
Yes.
Yes, all those things.
Of course,
And of
Faulkner.
course, I like William Faulkner, but he did not like Faulkner too much. But Hemingway, he did like Hemingway very much. Uh, we were big on Anglo American writers. Very little on the Asian, and hardly anything on the South American writers. Not uh, almost nothing on the European. So if we got any of those, it was because we finally we were so excited with writing, and so we would just so excited with reading. So we just got any writer that we.
But there's Nadine Gordheimer, right? In your
Mm,
you took her
it
up
was
in
not part of what we had to
the
study,
readings.
the readings. Yeah, but I discovered Nadine Gordheimer on my own. I discovered Eudora Welty on my own. Yeah, but it's fine. It's fine. It was a good curriculum. I would still go for that curriculum. I mean, I wouldn't mind anyone going through that curriculum. I tell you, if you go to that curriculum, you wouldn't be lost even now. Yeah, you would still be able to find your way. Before I wrote, I was attracted to the visual arts. In the elementary grades, my notebooks would not be filled with notes; they would be filled with scribblings, drawings. And all through high school, I drew, and I entertained this idea that maybe I will become a painter. But this was the Visayas, in the 1960s and the 1950s, and the art school. There was no art school here in the Visayas. None in Cebu. None in Cebu. Of course, less unimaginable to think of an art school in Leyte. Until now, we still don't have an art school here. So the other dream that I wanted to have um, in high school was to be a writer, and but if art was difficult to achieve, to study here, writing was even more difficult because there were no writing schools either. I wanted to go into journalism, but to go into both fine arts and journalism, you have to go to Manila. And that was unthinkable, uh, of imagining to go to Manila to study. So I took up teaching instead. I became a teacher. And no regrets. I think it had been a very fulfilling life. And I think I have helped a lot of people by teaching. So that's why I still have not given up on, or such as not given up on the visual arts. Every now and then I would pick up a brush and do a little, like that lady out there. Yeah, and a few pieces, actually a few pieces. Yeah. And during Yolanda days, when there was no electricity and there was nothing to do, uh, and the air was filled with anxiety, and I really could not do anything because of my age and all that. I kept out of people's hair by sketching. So I came out with a lot of just sketching, doing cross hatches. And then later on, I realized that when I'm doing this, I'm really just meditating. It's like meditation. So now that's what I think about when I do this. It's meditation. It's getting lost in doing something that is non-combative, that is quiet and peaceful, and your only enemy is the paper in front of you and space.
It's not as
It's not
combative as literature, as writing,
literature. You
poetry.
yes, it's a struggle.
Such a struggle.
Struggle. Yes, words are hard to tame. Words are very hard to tame. Words fight you back, right?
Yeah.
They do. They do. But a piece of paper is passive. And the pen in your hand obeys your muscles. So it's meditation. It's becoming peaceful when I do that. In the early 90s, Resil Mojares asked me to help in the Faigao Writers Workshop. It wasn't called Faigao then. It was called the USC Cebuano Study Center uh, Creative Writing Workshop. There were just no names, but Resil assembled the writers every not necessarily summer, but every time he feels like it, he would get them together, bring them up to the hills in Basay, and then uh, get all his friends to go. So he asked me to join as one of the panelists of that workshop. And it was during those workshops that I met these writers, Adonis Durado, you know, Themistocles, yeah, Tem Adlawan. Um, there's this writer in Davao, Don Pag-usara. Don Pag-usara. Several other writers, but those were the writers who were, Auman, Nick Auman,
Mm.
Nicholas, I think, Nicholas.
Pantalion.
Pantaleon,
Oh man.
Pantaleon Auman. And these guys were writing, very wonderful poetry in Cebuano. I envied them. I wanted to write Cebuano like they did. There was also the writer, the poet whose work I like very much, the poet of Buluon, Rene Estela Amper. Yeah, I really like his poetry. So I envied these guys. So I said, I want to write in Cebuano. I can speak Cebuano. Uh, and then, so, suway-suway kong sulat og Cebuano. Yang ipakita na kong Rene. Ano siya? Yabag ni Cebuano day. Yabag mo ni mo Cebuano. So okay, I stopped because mo lagi yabag. But really, the at that time, Adonis Dorado was, and Mike Obiñeta is another one. Oo. They were just learning to write at that time. And so there I was teaching them how to write, from my perspective of an English Anglo-American poetics. And they were, lapping it up too. And then they were applying it in their work and it strengthened their poetry. I said, teach me also how to write in Cebuano. And they were just laughing at me. But it entered my mind that I really should be able to write in a mother tongue. My mother tongue is not Cebuano. My mother tongue is Kinaraya. But because I had been traveling a lot throughout my childhood up to the time I got married, I was moving from one island to the other. I never did pick up any language well enough. And I lost my mother tongue. So I could not speak Karaya anymore. I can understand it. But neither can I speak Cebuano that well. Until now, my Cebuano is still very bookish kind of Cebuano. But still, I dared. I dared to write. And so this book came out. This one came out. Every now and then, I still write in Cebuano, but I'm still essentially a writer in English. I still am more comfortable with English. But still, my my advocacy is write in the mother tongue. And it's amazing that that advocacy has really, has really picked up, has really become a very valuable part of my life work. Because I think even, people like Adonis with a background of a strong Cebuano, uh, they have good Cebuano, and Cebuano literature is really strong, stronger than any other Visayan literature in the whole country. I think it's just one of the strongest, no? Binisaya, Cebuano. I think they gained a lot from their immersion in the creative writing workshops of Resil, which we taught with what we know of creative writing, from our training as readers in English. I think that helped to make the literature grow, to depart from the tradition and to embark on new themes and new ways of crafting. So that's how it started. I'm still pushing for the mother tongue. But you might anyway, this is how I thought about it then, Mike. back in the late 80s, back in those days, I noticed that English, the English that the kids were learning was inadequate for anything, not inadequate for anything, except probably conversations. I think it is the same way now. It's still the same way now, largely, except for a few who really learn to master it and think in the language. But at that time, in the late 1980s, the early 1990s, English has really deteriorated among the young people. But yet, when they write, I observed in those days, when they write in English. When they want to write poetry, they write poetry in English because that's what they're studying in school. They study poetry in English. It occurred to me that if this is how our literature is going to grow, from people who attempt to write in English, they will never be able to write well. And so the literature will die. I mean, Philippine literature will die from people trying to write in English. So the only way to broaden the participation of our youth in the creation of the literature of the country is to encourage them to write in the language that they know best. That's the language of, that's the mother tongue. Yeah. And true enough, I still notice this happening whenever I go to workshops. Now there are fewer people writing in English. In the workshops that we are holding here, yes, fewer people are writing in English and fewer people are writing in Filipino. Now that they know they can embrace their own native tongue, they do not refer to a foreign language anymore. I mean, because Tagalog would be foreign to them. Tagalog would be foreign to them, no matter what Bim thinks about it. It's still the mother tongue. It's still Waray here. That is the language of their life, the language of their heart. Now they would refer to their language first before they attempt to do anything else. I think that's happening now. So more and more people in all walks of life. It doesn't mean that because you are not in college, you cannot write poetry. No. If you are using your mother tongue, no matter where you come from, whatever your educational background is, you can write. You can tell stories. You can write poetry. So the participation is broader.
Do you follow a different process when you write in Cebuano, when you write in
No,
English?
the same.
It's the same.
Same. You just wait for when the poetry knocks at your head, and then will not let you sleep. So you sit down and
It's
talk to it.
amazing, Ma'am
Yeah.
Merle. I find it amazing that the first poem you wrote in Cebuano is actually an Ars Poetica.
Yeah, it's an ars poetic. Wait, it's in a way it's also the story of how I learned I taught myself to go back to the mother tongue.
And it takes the voice of a
It takes the
crone.
voice of something like a crone. I
Sage.
imagined a crone. Yeah. So it's more like me talking to myself. I was an old woman then already. I was already an old woman. A lot of white hair in my head.
What about are there times when your poetics in English would cross over to your poetics in Cebuano or vice versa? Is there such a crossing
Um,
that
I
you do
don't
translations
I
in the
don't
head or
wa- I don't s- I wala man ko'y huna-huna nga na I separate poetics for Cebuano or for English. Wala man. I mean, however I attend to the poem in English is the same way that I attend to the poem in Cebuano. In other words, whatever the poem needs, which is how I write in English, whatever the poem needs. So whatever the poem needs in Cebuano, that's I don't see any distinction in the way I write. I wouldn't say that, for example, that Magsinibuano ko din himo ni akong gamiton nga paagi. English ko din himo ni wala ra. Whatever the poem means, that's what I do.
So there's no translation?
No,
to
no
express-
translation.
Oh,
No translation. But I do translate. And
Yes.
translation is very, very difficult, even if, I do it myself. Anyway,
is-
one does it.
There's one poem which you would always talk about whenever you're asked about your writing in English.
Mhm.
The poem is entitled Mana Iday's Last Stand, where
Yes,
The
that
first-
poem, yeah.
you ever find it
Because-
difficult?
No, because I
write in
actually
English?
wanted to write that in Cebuano. I actually wanted to write that in Cebuano. This is a poem about an old woman hearing or listening to the rocks being harvested in the river where she washes clothes every day. And she says, well, they can take all the rocks in this river, but not the one where I wash my clothes. One where that big rock where I sit to wash clothes. And so the son was telling her, you go home now because there's nothing you can do. They will get any rock they want. Because they own us, they own the river, they own everything. So, go home. Said no. I will stay here and guard my rock. And I was thinking of a character, the character that I often meet in rural areas, the women with their big voice and ugly, tongue. Kana bang ilang sinultihan nga kanang naang hait kayo mga words niya. Vulgar kayo. I wanted to write the poem in that way. But see, I cannot. I cannot because I did not have the language. No, I didn't have the language. So I can just imagine that woman in my head, but I cannot put the words in her mouth. Because that woman speaking is me, after all. Still me. No matter how I try to assume another character, I can't get out of. I know I cannot be. I mean, my imagination falters at that point. I cannot move out of who I am and what I am. So I had to write in English. And I had to find a way to write it in English and still have a sense of that old vicious woman, that old virago of a woman. I cannot bring her up. So it's a failure. In that sense, it's a failure. The poem is a failure, but I think it's still a good poem.
I think it's
It's still a good poem.
Is there a time where you simultaneously write a poem in both Cebuano and English?
No, I'm like Rene Amper. He says, some poems arrive in English, some poems arrive in Cebuano. So it's like that. It's like that. I don't write them together. I mean, but I do translate them as much as I can from one language to another. For example, ang misay kong mga Galo, that's Cebuano gina siya.
Yeah, it is.
Cebuano gina siya.
Which is why
Ang
was it difficult
katong-
for you to translate it?
Yeah.
You didn't translate it at first.
No.
Cebu Lakaw and
Oh,
Misay.
even the translation, I don't like it. I don't like the translation in English. I don't really like it. But you have to translate, for consistency's sake.
for the readers.
Yeah, for the
at least.
readers. I do not know if knowing different languages, the
Yes,
different
Visayas.
design languages affect my writing, because when I write in English, I think in English, I struggle with the words in English and with that whole, um, the whole ecology in my mind of writing in English. I don't think that knowing these languages make any bearing, but there's one thing about what you said about the themes in my poem, roots and roots. Yeah. At a certain point, I thought about them as the search for the constant the unending human search for home. Home being that 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 locale or that place, that sense of, maybe home being that sense of perfect perfect comfort, perfect ease. And because home is very hard to find, uh, that's why the poems are always looking for, yeah, looking, always looking,
Why is it so
always
hard to
search.
find?
Because it's not place. Because home is not place. It's not where, well, but of course, part of my background is as a person is that I've been moving from place to place. So I I grew up always having to deal with separation, with turning my back on something that I like, that I love, and facing the unknown always. All my life, it's always turning my back on something that I have gotten used to or have become comfortable with, and always to face the unknown. You know?
You have a very
And
nice line in. I think I should bring this up. You have a very good way of putting it. In one of your poems, um, about the rogue who loves
who
the
loves
rogue.
a rogue?
Mm.
Yeah. How does it go?
Uh,
I think that's uh,
Gypsy, Blue
yes.
Gypsy. Notes from
No.
last
Last note from
notes
the blue
last
gyp
note from the Blue
from the
Gypsy.
blue gypsy.
It's something like that.
Oh,
It's a pervasive theme in your
oh.
work. Uh,
Who loves
who loves the road?
who
Who
loves
loves the road must get a rogue for a lover. That's how you
who
said it.
loves a rogue
Who loves the road must get a rogue for a
for a
lover.
lover. Yeah. So you have to also willing to let go.
Yeah.
Willing to let go. Because the rogue will always turn his back on you, no? And so I was the rogue. I was always turning my back
It's
on
also in
something.
the in your famous poem, the most anthologized poem, uh, "Bringing the Doves."
Bringing the
That's
dolls.
also it's also there.
Yeah, something like when where loyalty, yeah, where loyalty or love is at stake. Hers
Hers
are
are the true
true rights,
rights.
not I. Yeah. Mike, when I came here, one of the first things I did was to look for evidences of Waray literature. And so I did find out that there were two books in Waray, that we found two books anyway.
That was Luangco.
The two books written by Luangco. Oo. And when I looked at those two books, there was hardly anything. I mean, there's hardly anything you can find there. There are a few materials that he culled from various sources, but that's all. And there were no readings, not enough readings. So this is Waray literature. Then I kept hearing about Makabenta, and I kept hearing about
Sente.
Docente. And then later on, when I got to know Vic, he introduced me to a few more writers like Trinchera, De Vera, and these are the Waray literature. But I cannot understand. I mean, there's hardly anything. There's hardly anything. And talking to this, talking to this, people like Vic and Dave, they were they practically dismissed Waray literature as no longer existent. No one is writing in Waray. No one is reading in Waray. Uh, I don't think Waray literature will ever be revived. That's what they were saying. I said, so I could not argue with them because after all, they own this. They own this culture. I'm only a visitor. So anyway, Vic wanted to open a writer's workshop. So it was actually Vic who organized the first writers' workshop.
This was the one
This was
with
in
Maximo Servidad?
Yes, this was the one
workshop.
with Maximo Servidad. This
Arturo
was in
Bautista.
19, when was I
89?
here?
89?
No,
Is it not?
no, 82.
Oh,
82, oo,
earlier than
oo. And then he organized also the seminarians, Saturday workshops. They came for 3 Saturdays. So those were the workshops. He organized it. I said, since you are here, you will be the panelist together with, well, we were all Silimanians in a way, Willie Remolio and Dave Henotiva. So the three of us paneled in that first workshop. Uh, our problem then was that the people that we called to participate in this workshop, UP was very kind to give us money so we could hold the workshop for 2 days. They were all grassroots poets from all over. Our connection was the DYVL CDI, I think. Oo. So they came, they stayed for a couple of days. They listened to us. And I think we made the mistake of applying, our knowledge of literature from our Western perspective. We were all university trained, and these were all grassroots poems. We did not know where they were coming from. They did not know where we were coming from. But anyway, we enjoyed the 2 days because I think for the first time, they saw literature being discussed and being made much of. Uh, that is the first workshop. And they still came, I think, for a second workshop. And it's the same thing, basically. So then we started offering workshops to the students. And I said, let's just take anything that they show us, however they were writing. Let us take that. Let's look at it seriously. Take that up seriously. And so we did. So they submitted very bad poems in English. Still took it up. and then in one of these sessions, I would say, look, this is your poem, okay? Now let's translate this poem into Visayan, into Winaray. And then you will see the difference. Because they were thinking in Waray naturally, and they were writing in English. Thinking in Waray, writing in English. Um, Sentiment is very Waray. How can it ever work in English? So then they saw, no, that if you write in Waray, with the words that come readily to your mind, you will write better. And that is how it all started, Mike, little by little. Little by little.
But this was not yet this, right?
This was not yet this right.
When did this right
I was gone for, after 2 years here of teaching, I was gone for 5 years. I was in Siliman. I was gone for 5 years, and during that time, I think Vic was able to organize one more workshop without me. And then I came back in 1991. Then I started uh, holding little workshops using my class as a base. They made me teach because there was a course entitled independent study, independent readings, where a teacher can arrange any kind of curriculum for the class, and I used that as a base for creative writing. So I would hold workshops in my classes. I began to have people who were genuinely interested in writing. But they were students, and they were going to graduate, and they were going to have careers, to get married, have children, and so on. So wala pa yun. And then by that time, the UP Institute of Creative Writing would ask me to join their workshops also as panelist. There was a time when UP appointed me as associate faculty of creative writing, and then they would request me to attend some of their workshops in summer writers workshop in Baguio. And then the UP ICW, no? ICW? creative writing. They wanted to, they got briefly ambitious. They wanted to have a nationwide span. They wanted to hold a creative writing workshop across the country using the campuses as base. So they wanted to hold a workshop. In fact, we did hold a workshop here in Tacloban. Neil Garcia came. We held workshops in Iloilo. And I think Jimmy held workshops also in Mindanao. And then they discovered that if they did it that way, they would be holding workshops 4 or 5 times in the whole year, and it was going to be very exhausting for all of them. So that was cut. And but I had the president then that I remember fondly is President Javier. Javier was very, he attended to the external campuses. Um, and he always told the other campuses, huwag niyong galawin yan si Alunan at si Subo dyan sa Tacloban, ha? Yan sila. And, well, things in Tacloban were not always nice, and kind. So, I was really seriously pondering at a certain point the possibility of moving to another campus. In fact, I think Dr. Cuino then was already telling me, sige na Merlie, transfer ka na dun sa Davao. I said, sige. But of course, Javier said, don't touch them there. Anyway, to say it for him naman, one morning, one very, very early morning, we were in the airport waiting for a flight to Tacloban. He asked me, ano ba talaga ang gusto mong gawin sa Tacloban? I said, gusto kong mag-workshop sa Tacloban. Sige, bigyan kita ng pera. Huwag ka nang umalis sa Tacloban. Diyan ka na lang mag-workshop ka. So he gave me, this was about just a few months before his term ended. He gave me, sabi niya, I'll give you 900,000. Doon ka na sa workshop. Pero matipid naman ang mga workshops namin dito, no? Matipid. So, yung 900,000, malaki na yun. So, I said, okay. He gave me the first tranche of 400,000. Then, Nemenso came in. And Nemenso declared that there was no more money from the president's office. So, naputol yung 900,000 ko. Naging 400,000 na lang. But, this was about 1997. So, doon nagkaroon ng BizRight. Because then, I can hold workshops regularly already. And then, I also held workshops. I also, I had friends in Bohol. They would organize workshops there. Their workshops. And then I would, sige, sabi ko sa kanila, I would go there. I will hold workshops for you. You don't have to give me any honorarium. You just give me a place to stay and some meals, and then I'll pay my fare because I have money. The 400,000 was, very convenient. So I'd go there. That was how we were able to hold workshops also in Bohol. We held workshops in Biliran, and that was how I was able to help establish the Lamirao Creative Writing Workshop. So, I have BizRight, which was based in Tacloban. BizRight, akin lang yun, pangalan ko lang yun. BizRight. It was never really official.
But BizRight also had, I noticed that you have different types of workshops. Like there's this all Visayas. Is part of BizRight.
I was able to hold several workshops from that little money panagsugat. I would augment the money by from the NCCA fund grant. I would ask the dean or the president of the chancellor of UPV to support the workshop. So I would have a little seed money, and then I would ask for support from the chancellor's office. And to say it for UPV, they always provided funds for some of these activities. So this right became the workshop for UP Visayas. Although it was never in any official capacity, it was just the name I gave to this activity. It was more like a faculty project. So every time we offered it, we call it this right because it had become regular. We were doing it regularly, but it was not really adopted by the university. Although UP Visayas had always supported our proposals for holding workshops. In fact, during the time of Dr. Ida Shoson, she was telling us that if you can show the development of second liners, people who will take over from you once you are retired, we will adapt the workshop officially. We'll make it, as they say, we will institutionalize it. Yeah, but it never happened that way. So when I had the money from Dr. Javier, I encouraged an alumnus of UP Tacloban to propose a workshop for the NCCA. So he proposed the Lamirao. I gave him the template for the proposal. He proposed, and it was approved by the NCCA. And lo and behold, he finally had a workshop. So
It's Harold.
Harold Mercurio, oo, every year he would propose, and every year he would get an approval. But I was coordinator at that time of Region 8, as coordinator for the region. And in those days, it was very hard to push for activities for the region, you know. So sometimes there was a time when they approved the proposal for 25,000. Harold said, I cannot operate on that amount. So there was a year when they returned the money because it was too small to hold a significant activity. But from thenceforth, the NCCA supported the Lamirao every year, every time they propose. And it also supported this right. So there were two workshops. I was beginning to tell you that I wanted workshops in four strategic areas, one in Samar, one in Tacloban. I was hoping a workshop would be formed in Biliran to be handled by faculty who was also alumnus. And I was hoping that there would be a workshop in the south, either
Southern Leyte.
yeah, Southern Leyte, either Bye or whoever was crazy enough to dream with me. Harold was the one. So now six we had the 16th Lamirao last year.
This year.
This
You
year,
were in
yes, yes, this
Tacloban.
year. 16th Lamirao, and we are planning for the 17th already. But sadly, when I retired in 2008, I held my last workshop. I held my last workshop because I wasn't sure that somebody would pick up after me. As a matter of fact, I did turn over the workshop to Dr. Subo, but whatever his reasons were, he did not take it up seriously. So this right folded up and was never heard from again until now.
Let's uh, talk a little about the last workshop you held because I think it was a very significant
Yeah,
workshop. That was the part of the Centennial
yeah. It,
celebrations
it
of
was the
UP.
Centennial of UP, and so we thought that the workshop should offer, or rather, yeah, the workshop, the Visrite should offer something to, to help celebrate. So we offered the Centennial Creative Writing Workshop. Um, it was significant because this was invitational. It was no longer competitive. We asked some of the significant young writers of that period to join the workshop and to present papers. So they presented papers as well as their own works. And that workshop now, by the way, the proceeds of that workshop, the proceedings of that workshop, I am now working on. That's one of my most important project now, the one that I'm completing. I'm calling it Lasang sa Pasumbingay, collection of critical essays from 16 Visayan writers and their poetry or their fiction. It's accepted by the ADNU, Ateneo de Naga University Press. And hopefully, I cannot hope for it to come out in 2019, but I think it will come out in 2020. So that's my latest project now. This right is gone. I'm trying to revive it, but the university is dragging its feet and does not understand why I'm so keen on reviving it. I'm interested in really getting it back on its feet because UP Tacloban has finally accepted the role of being the creative writing center for the region. It has a creative writing program in its curriculum now in the Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts, yeah, BACA program. They have creative writing, and I was hoping that they would be open to the workshop, and but well, it's hard when you're no longer really directly connected to the university. So the project is probably will die a natural death, or that proposal will probably never see the light of day. That's it. So Lamirao now is very active, and I'm happy to continue supporting it. And Harold is very happy to have his project finally celebrated in this volume. It's Pinili. Yeah. This volume is 15 years of Lamirao. I'm doing my collected works. I think after Lasang sa Parumbingay, I'll be putting together the collection of poetry. I don't know, Mike. I want to do the essays too. I want to do a memoir.
Maybe you should write a memoir.
Maybe I should do the memoir too. So I'm thinking of those two projects. One, first, put the poetry together and get that to the press and then work on the memoir. Maybe I've already started on a few essays. I'll just pick up on the essays that I've already written and just put them together, and add places which I have not touched on in some of these pieces. So those are the two projects that I have in mind. 3, Lasang sa Pasumbingay, immediate, because it's ongoing now. The collected works also ongoing. And then hopefully I will still have enough mind left to do my memoir. Enough energy, enough creative juices to do that. I'm amazed because I can see other languages picking up and becoming stronger. I see, for example, a strong development of Kinaraya literature in Panay. And although probably not as strong as Kinaraya, we also have development on the Akyanon. And of course, Hiligaynon is always some literary body of literature to watch out for, no? And aside from that, the Mindanao writers are really quite active these days. Cotabato, the writers of Cotabato, the writers of Davao, the writers of Cagayan de Oro. Yeah, there's a movement going on also in the Zamboanga area, south. That's south, no? Southwest. Which part of Mindanao is that? Zamboanga side. They have a special language there. Chabacano. Oo. Naga, or rather Bicol, is active, very active. So I see the rise of regional literature. Although, of course, regional literature is it's still a word a term that people might be questioning, you know. But I see the rise of literature in various languages in the Philippines, and I'm very happy with that development. My idea is that every language in the Philippines is part of our patrimony. We have to take care of it because it's part of our heritage. Maybe if you belong to a language group, which we might call the primary language, like Tagalog or Filipino, you wouldn't agree with that idea because you would probably most likely be thinking in terms of unifying the Philippines with one language. But that effort to me is very that's not unification, that's division. By making one language superior than the others, you're actually putting down the groups, the language and the groups of people who speak these languages. You are putting them in a subsidiary status, and that's divisive. That's divisive to the whole nation. So let all these languages rise, no? And let the people write about their experiences and their memories in their own mother tongues, and gather all of these, because these words, this polyphony of words, polyphony of languages, represent the Filipino. They represent the unity of the nation. And our job really is to try to learn these languages, as many of these as we can. That's a tall order. Maybe it's a tall order, but not so tall. It's easy to learn these languages. You just need to stay for a few days, a few weeks, a few months in one place, and you will easily learn the languages. Well, I'm saying this because I've always carried around 5 languages in my head all these many years, and I have never found it bothersome, you know. In fact, it's fun. When when I was attending these meetings of the university, here I speak Waray. The moment I land in Cebu, I speak in Cebuano. An hour after, I am in Iloilo, and then I would have to be speaking to my friends in Hiligaynon. So it's fun. It's fun, and you can do it. And before long, you don't even know what language you're speaking anymore. But if you don't have a prejudice against any of these languages, it's fun. It's you are the richer for it. So Philippine literature will be the sum total of all that are being written across the nation in all the languages of the nation.
I think we should end
That's
that.
how I imagine Philippine literature to be. So I always tell the Waray writers, when you write in Waray, you are writing not just for the Waray people, you are writing for the nation, you are writing for the country, you're writing for the Filipino. Your work is the work of a Filipino. It belongs to the body of Philippine literature.
Philippine literature, according to Merlie Alunan, is not written only in Filipino and English, but in the many languages of the country. This augurs well for the future of Philippine literature.
Una sa tanan, ugta ang imong larang. Unya, way ko katulog. Pananglit di kalikyan ang pagduka. Higda lang una sa ngilit sa nagdugitom nga mga dagom. Ay padalas katalaw, katapol, kahangawa, kahigwaos sa mga nagpunsisok unya ng mga pangutana dinha sa unahan. Ay glingi-lingi. Timani ang dagom sinati sa balaod sa unos na iyang hinambin. Ang tunog way pagtagam ug unsa pa. Ang way katapusang hawanan sa langit may mga tinaguang dalan nga angay imog yung latiron bisan sa imong kahinanok. Ang mga tunok ayaw glikay. Ayaw pasipala sa mga sawa nga namaliko ko daplin sa kalsadang itom. Mangtas na sila ug kanunay gutom. Ay kahibong unya kung sa imong paghidunggo o paghimata ba hinuon, way leon o tigre ang muyukbo sa imong tiilan. Ang mga anghel, way kisaw. Ang sapa sa kantihay, tingali ganig hubas. Ang nangigdal nga kabatuan, nang liki sa tumang kauhaw, sama sa imong dila. Apan, hunong ka dinhi. Di nimo maabot ang balay sa mga kwaknit nga buta. Mao sila ang nagkaput sa gahom nga mutugkad sa lalom sa mga ginaray sa kangitngit ug katugnaw. Hangyua sila bisag tipik lang sa ilang kaalam. Kini sa imong larang kinahanglan gayud. Tingalig maamang ka ug ako sab mabungol. Kay usahay ang pulong bansan man sa tidlom nga kahilom. Ayaw taon kog basula kun wa natoy makaalinggat. Bisag siyam pakadila ang magyamyam sa tanang matang sa kahinam umulitok bahinuon sa ngalang bathala. Ug karon tungod sa nagkautas nga kahayag sa imong lampara, paglingkod. Ang tagak nga pluma sa garbusong agila, kapti pag-ayo, ituslog kini sa dugo sa imong galamhan, tulira ang papel nga nakunot sa pagpanlimbasog. Nan karon, sugdi na ang pagtukaw. Tangaga ang kahadlok. Ingon man ang kaminghaw. Uguma sa imong baba ang kalisang. Pilay palad. Sa imong pagatang, takulahaw sa imong atubangan, ang karnerong pula mutungha ug unya, hinay-hinay sa imong kiliran. Mutugdon ug magpahikap sa iyang balhibo ang nagdilaab ug idlas nga bulalakaw.